Hello, everyone. My name is Artemis Karlatidou. I'm a lecturer in citizen science in the Department of Geography at UCL. I would like to welcome you all to this series of online webinars that we organize at UCL and the People Nature Lab at UCL East. They are funded by the ERASMUS Plus project, community-driven digital action, a catalyst for social change in the COVID-19 crisis, or HEIDI in short. I'll put the link of the project HEIDI in the chat area if you want to find out more information. So these online webinars aim to promote citizen science, hence their title as Citizen Science for All Talks. Each Citizen Science for All event has a specific theme, and we invite world-leading experts to share their knowledge from their specific field of practice and the many years of experience that they have working in this area. Before I move on and introduce today's speakers, I would like to announce to those interested in citizen science that UCL has set up the first ever MSc in citizen science, which will be available from September 2022. And you can still apply for it. The deadline is the end of June, I believe. I will just put the link for the new course in the chat area if you want to find more information. And I will also put the link of the People Nature Lab if you want to find more information about our lab. In this Citizen Science for All event, we will be talking about citizen science with underrepresented and marginalized communities. Citizen science has been recently defined in lay terms as a scientific work undertaken by members of the public with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. Citizen science, as you probably agree with me, has seen a massive growth in the recent years, with hundreds of thousands of volunteers worldwide collecting data, and of course, a massive availability of relevant tools and platforms to support volunteers to do so. Citizen science attracts mostly people from a very specific demographic profile, and that is mostly Western, well-educated people who are less likely to be excluded from certain activities. In line with the No One Left Behind United Nations principle, we need to make an effort and ensure that we include everyone affected by certain issues or everyone who needs, for whatever reasons, to be involved in these processes and address local issues that their communities are facing. So today's focus will be on how citizen science works with communities that are usually excluded and marginalized. We have two speakers today that I would like to introduce you. First is Petra Benyei, who is a researcher investigating the use of transdisciplinary approaches, including citizen science tools, to document, share, and protect indigenous and local knowledge. Petra has participated actively in the design, implementation, dissemination, and analysis of the eConnect platform, which is a Wikilai platform focused on documenting traditional ecological knowledge in Spain. Petra is also involved with the LITSI and Lithium projects, which investigate the process of transformation of a citizen science platform called Open Tech Web to increase its accessibility amongst underrepresented communities, helping make climate research and policy issues more inclusive and equitable. Our second speaker today is Rick Hall, who is a writer and consultant in the arts and STEM education, young people and creativity in learning. Rick is the founder of Ignite, a UK-registered charity dedicated to promoting creativity in learning. Since 2007, Rick has led a series of learning programs designed to encourage young people, their families and communities to regard STEM subjects as innately creative. Rick is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a 2016 fellow of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, awarded to support his research in South Korea and India into creativity and innovation in STEM education. His book, The A to Z of Creativity, an illustrated guide to creativity in learning, is due to be published online and also as a podcast in 2022. Alice Shepard will be live tweeting as usually the event, and you can use Twitter to post your questions, or you can use the chat area here on Zoom to post any questions, which Alice will also transfer on Twitter. Due to the limited time we have, we will only be able to take a few questions at the end, but the speakers are happy to answer your questions on Twitter or if you directly email them. So thank you very much, everyone. Petra, over to you.
Thanks, Artemis. It's so nice to hear when someone introduces yourself. You're like, oh, yeah, that's me. So nice. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see my presentation? Wait, 1 second. Can you see it? Yeah? Okay. So yeah, so as Artem, I'm gonna try to be fast because I'm really curious about the questions also. So I don't want to bore everyone with work with it because you will probably find it soon in the journal Citizen Science Theory and Practice, where we have submitted the paper. So hopefully soon you will be able to read the full work there. So I'm just gonna present some of the latest work we have done, and it's not only these projects that Artemis mentioned, the Conecte and Reposition project, but also a set of amazing projects that were put together and analyzed by a big team. So I will be talking a bit about that. But before I start talking, I always like to do this land acknowledgement. And I would like to dedicate a moment to reflect upon my privileges and acknowledge that even if I don't live in the land of dispossessed peoples, my ancestors might have been directly or indirectly participants in the displacement, exploitation, or genocide of people, and have at one point dispossessed them from their homelands and territories. Doing this land acknowledgement, I aim to bring relevance to these issues and declare my profound respect for these peoples, acknowledging the historical injustices they have suffered, and declaring my intent to contribute to correct those injustices through my work and life. And especially, I would like to acknowledge the peoples that I work with, specifically in my case, the Chimane of Bolivia and the Cabraligos in Spain. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of a side project of mine. I always get trapped in these crazy things, and Artemis was also part of this crazy project. So in 2020, in the online European Citizen Science Association conference, the EXA conference, there was a session called Fragile Contexts and Indigenous Communities. And in this session, we were put together with several projects, including Rick's projects that he's going to explain later, but also HEIDI projects and other projects from different backgrounds working on this fragile context and indigenous communities. And so when we got together, we thought, wow, we knew each other, but we hadn't really got time to discuss what challenges we face, what kind of lessons we could share and strategies and the impact that our projects have. So we decided to, apart from having this session, go a bit more deeper into understanding these challenges, lessons, and strategies. And not only among us, which were like 4 or 5 projects, but also trying to include other initiatives.
Petra, sorry, apologies for interrupting. Can you speak a little bit closer to your microphone?
Yes, sorry for my...
They cannot hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay.
And I keep going. Sorry for interrupting again.
No, no worries. So, yeah, so we try to follow this ANOCWA and all, which were doing a similar work in the context of technologies for sustainable development goals. And we did a survey which 15 initiatives answered, and also 3 events with different attendees from these 15 initiatives, in which we discussed these topics together and from which we extracted main topics or themes that were common to all the projects. So some of the projects that were selected where the Connect project and the Election project, which are the ones that I lead, but also projects in Prey Lang, which is in Cambodia, in Cameroon, in Brazil, and several others. And one similarity that they all had was that they worked in these non-Western, non-educated, non-industrialized, non-rich, non-democratic contexts. And this is important to know because there is this whole framework that explains that weird context, no? So the Western, the educated, the rich, the industrial, the democratic, are normally more present in, well, in psychology, in ICT, in many areas, and also in citizen science. No? So this has been a critique that citizen science has not been as inclusive as it could be. And so that's why we wanted to gather all these projects and initiatives to tell the story of these projects and the challenges they face, the strategies that they use to overcome these challenges and the impact they have. Also to try to understand how could we do it better, or even like if some of our learnings could apply to Western context, no? or global North. So, well, some examples from projects, I'm not going to go a lot into depth about this, was the Election project, which took this open tech platform, which was designed by Western academics to document local indicators of climate change impact and transform it into something that was applicable in non-Western context. So we did that through these co-design workshops with indigenous and local communities, especially focusing on the user experience and user interface issues, no? Like what icons were applicable or not, if we needed translations, what if the classifications that were there were meaningful for the people, but also a very big focus on ethical issues. So trying to solve the intellectual property rights issues, and trying to be more horizontal and in the process of creating the app, which is now oblo.network. You can go there if you want to look at it. And so this was one example of project. So it was a global project with indigenous peoples mostly and targeting climate change. But another project that was part of this analysis that we did was the Connect project, which is really different because it's a platform to share traditional knowledge on wild and cultivated plants in Spain. So the focus now is on seed networks and protected varieties, and the platform was co-designed with farmers, students, and activists, and of course the researchers in Spain. So you would think like, well, this is not, you know, a fragile context or a weird context, but in reality, the people that we work with are really underrepresented because they are normally elder, they live in rural and remote areas, even though they live in a global North country. So that was the idea, to group not only like the Global South initiatives, with which many of them are included, but also Global North initiatives that engage with underrepresented communities, which is the topic of this talk. So I'm just gonna go quickly to the challenge, like the main findings that we had. Regarding challenges that were common to the projects, well, some of them are common to all citizen science, no, such as funding, but some were very specific, such as the stability and security of the participants. And this is because due to the fragility of this context, in some cases, participants' lives were threatened, which is something that normally wouldn't necessarily happen in BioBlitz, for instance. I mean, just to make a and there was also some internal issues that came across, and these were mainly related to the trust of these our communities that work with us on an external agent, specifically Western agents, which also had some impacts in terms of participant engagement and motivation, but also in general, like all these issues relate to the context also, not to context in which poverty, lack of access to formal education, or other barriers make citizen science more challenging. And a very interesting challenge also was the data security and data sovereignty issue, which refers to the main problematic that we face when sharing or opening this data, which is and should be protected and owned and governed by the communities, in our opinion. And also one challenge that was a bit, I found quite interesting, was this epistemological issue, right? Because we work with in contexts where Western science is not the main way of knowing and doing. Western science is something a bit external. So sometimes we face this clash, and that was interesting as a challenge, I think. Well, I put here some examples, but I'm not going to read them, but just so that you know, like what I was saying, security and threats to the people that work, but also, yeah, database security and digital divide were some of the main challenges. Regarding the strategies that the projects reported to overcome these challenges, I think some of the most interesting were related to the methods and the privacy and ethics. So for the methods, there was a clear tendency to use the bottom-up and long-term approaches for trust building in general, but also to these co-design the technologies that were used and make them appropriate to the local needs. And I feel like this is something that was really important for our context, the context that where we work with. But of course, there's a big debate that this should be the standard, no, for all citizen science, probably. So that's something interesting that came out. And also regarding privacy and ethics, there was this call and strategy and actual push for data sovereignty, which is the right of the community to be governing the data and deciding what to do with it, right? And these sometimes were secured through peer-to-peer data sharing method, which means that data is not sent to external repositories in the global north, but rather shared phone to phone or like local database to local database. So the data always is in the hands of the community. Well, and some examples of things that projects said. I really like this one about Lixion, that they said that they were less interested in building trust and instead being authentic, transparent, and focused fully on empowerment of the partners. And the trust should be an equally authentic result of this project. So it's like you don't build trust. Trust comes to you because you have done this authentic, transparent, and focused and empowerment focused approach. So I thought that was interesting. And finally, I'm looking at the time. We also discussed, and this was surprising because this was not really a focus of the workshops, but a lot of impacts came up when discussing challenges and strategies. And interestingly, scientific impacts that were also present, because then it would not be citizen science, right? There was a scientific kind of goal in the project always, like tracking biodiversity or understanding natural resource management or plant uses. But these impacts were not so importantly reported by the people that participated. So like there was almost no mention of it. There was no big nature and science paper, published. It was really something shocking for me and like interesting, and also understandable, no, because of the human rights approach that all these projects have, and specifically most of the impacts were referring to fighting legal battles or achieving community empowerment or reconquering rights and access to resources. That on the short term, and on the long term, also this idea of increasing capacities and strengthening strategic partnerships among the communities and other actors, including scientists, but why not other actors also? No? So that was kind of like big impacts that were mentioned. And yeah, just to close a bit, well, with this example, the maps that were done with Mapeo, for instance, this was a remote access case, were used by the Guarani in Ecuador to protect their territory from oil extraction, and were used in litigations. And communities were able to report oil spills and other impacts that were not reported by companies. making them accountable, no? And also in the Yakutia case, these community-based monitoring groups could influence research management at different state and district levels to leverage this information. So they were using this information, leveraging this information for their own needs. And I think that's kind of like one of the main things that all these projects had in common. It was that they were people-centered, no? Like the science was not at the center. For me, the people was at the center. And their needs and their rights and their expectations, probably. So maybe that's how I want to close, because Rick is also going to talk about more projects that were part of this analysis and also more information about other things. So yeah, if you're more interested on following up with this, the article probably will soon be published, and you can email me to my email account. And
Perfect, Petra, thank you so much. Thank you so much for presenting that as well. It is so nice to see all the work from so many interesting, like a fantastic group of people working in similar contexts, coming together and, communicating all this invaluable knowledge to, so many more that perhaps work in a similar area. So, Rick, are you ready? We can take questions at the end.
Okay, well, thanks, Artemis, and I'll also just quickly share my screen, if I may, and I'm hoping that everyone, a good thumbs up, Abril, would be helpful. Yes, thank you. So welcome and thanks especially to Artemis, Abril, and Alice, and the HEIDI and UCL team for inviting me to contribute this afternoon. And thank you to Petra for going first and sharing your considerable expertise and experience. So as you've heard, my name is Rick Hall. I'm a writer and consultant, I guess, in the arts and STEM education, doing a lot of work with young people. I have actually recently retired from Ignite, the education charity. But as Artemis very kindly mentioned in her introduction, a lot of the work that we've been doing is trying to develop an approach to STEM learning and the engagement of communities that links curiosity and creativity. So we try to encourage a kind of creative approach. And for many of the communities that we work with, it's very much around young people or generally communities who may feel that science isn't for the likes of them. There's a term that we come across a lot in Nottingham, or it's not for the likes of us. And that's really how we've taken underrepresentation in terms of this presentation today. So the underrepresented, what do we mean? And why are we concerned to broaden the representation of participants in citizen science? One aspect of citizen science is that it's a very clear strand of participatory research that expands our kind of definitions, if you like, of open science, a concept and an accompanying strategy that's recently been adopted by UNESCO, I think in November. And for citizen science, underrepresentation may also be described as the harder to reach. But we should always ask ourselves, why are some groups harder to reach? Is it that they are actually more likely to be easier to ignore? Why else are some groups or communities less able to access opportunities for participation? And are they marginalized in other aspects of society and services? So as a non-academic, I'm especially interested in discovering where knowledge resides outside of research institutions. I have nothing against academics. Some of them are my best friends, but I'm interested in lay information, lay knowledge as well. So I'm always interested in opportunities that may be described as seeking a kind of parity of esteem and confidence, creating platforms and projects where participants contribute on as equal a basis as possible, always acknowledging that people's and groups' skills, knowledge, and experiences will be different, but also valued. So I believe that local and lay knowledge can make significant contributions to the wider research outcomes of citizen science. Now, this slide quotes from a paper that was produced a couple of years ago that were trying to define the characteristics of citizen science and some of those broader definitions. And as you've heard from Petra, there may be instrumental outcomes in addition to work that's actually led by researchers. So on this slide, I'm particularly interested in degrees and forms of engagement. At what point in the planning and design of a citizen science program do you bring the different contributors and the participants together? And as many or most citizen science projects involve accessing resources, notably funding, at what point do you involve all potential participants in making a funding application? And of course, also linked to that is the defining the desired and the sought for outputs, outcomes, and impact. So again, this is quoting from the paper that was produced around the definitions and the characteristics of citizen science, and the UCL team were very closely involved in conducting the survey that led to that report. So let me move on to some case studies, if I may. As you've heard, Ignite, an education charity based in Nottingham, and our purpose really is to promote creativity and curiosity in learning, and to raise opportunities for communication and engagement in some of the poorest communities in our city and in our country. So over many years, we've built a profile for this creative approach to STEM learning and science participation and engagement, and that includes citizen science projects. And I should mention that, I founded Ignite some 19 years ago. So we've been evolving and developing our understanding very definitely through the partnerships that we've been developing and the expertise that we've had access to from research and from academics. So I want to spend a little time talking about Night Walks, which is the project that has contributed to the fragile context, the weird paper that Petra has outlined. You can see the aims there. It grew out of an earlier project with a local primary school in Nottingham, again in an area of acute disadvantage, where we were able to invite children, parents, grandparents to come with us to a fairly local nature reserve. I mean, importantly, we provided the bus to get there. And this first version of Night Walks occurred over 3 different times of the year, in March, July, and November, and after sunset, after dusk. Now, this was a collaboration. So groups were guided through the natural environment and worked with the scientists, with a range of scientists, rangers, artists, to create memories of their discoveries and learning. The model produced some astonishing outputs and outcomes and prompted us to revise and offer the engagement and citizen science study opportunities to other community groups. And you'll see that as well as involving families from the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Refugee Forum, sorry, that I apologise for the acronym there, in the study of the natural environment, there was the other aims of boosting confidence and communication. And Petra has mentioned, that trust and confidence comes as the project itself develops. So I'm talking here about the key partners, and it's worth noting that some of the partners here, including the Bulwell Toy Library, which is a local facility, a local kind of charity. And they've taken over the management of a local area of urban woodland. Now, the early involvement with the Refugee Families Forum ensured that we were aware and took account of the circumstances of the families, including the need to provide transport to the area. So we were paying for taxi fares or bus fares just to reach the location. We also provided food over a campfire, which gave, interestingly, the mothers in particular, a significant memory of tending open fires, because many of the families, had direct experience of that. And so it's this combination, I think. And I think, Petra again has touched on the interdisciplinarity and the opportunities that citizen science gives us for working across the disciplines. So we work with freelance artists and photographers, as well as researchers and scientists and so on. Now I'm going to move on just to a couple of parallel projects. Working again with refugee families. This is Aromas That Nurture. It's a slightly odd title, I suspect, but this is working with families from 7 different countries. And they brought different memories through food and cooking. And it was another project that combined the experiences of university researchers and then support organizations and the families themselves in the making and in the design and the evolution of the project itself. And I'll just pause here just to show you some of the other photographs, and you'll see that there was a lot of joy in the development of this project. And it's still ongoing. We have another celebration still to come, and the sessions, as you can see, offered this chance for families to reminisce about their favorite foods and their memories associated with them. And I've made a reference here to the role of the theatre maker and the writer, Andy Barrett, who's a very, very experienced creative practitioner working with community groups, both internationally and very locally. And I've started to describe him as a contemporary griot or griot, depending on your location, about the pronunciation. And I just want to pause briefly, just because I think that there is something about bringing in a story maker, a theatre practitioner, to work alongside the citizen science aspect of the project. So the role of a griot, it's a Western African term, and particularly in Francophone parts of West Africa. The griot is a troubadour. They're almost the counterpart of a medieval European minstrel. The griot knows everything that is going on and provides a kind of living archive of people's traditions. They are virtuosos. They have talents that command a kind of universal admiration. And in many of these societies, the griot, or sometimes also referred to as the jelly, is a historian, an advisor, an arbitrator, a praise singer, and a storyteller. So they essentially serve as oral history books, preserving ancient stories and traditions through songs. And it's that lay and indigenous knowledge that is encapsulated by the griot that I'm particularly interested in, and I'm keen to see whether there is a role, a contemporary role for griot in our societies. Just briefly to finish with, Engaging Environments is a 3-year project in the UK. It's again about engaging with the natural environment, but again creating new narratives about our relationship with the environment. So again, partnerships, collaboration, interdisciplinarity, and the early participation in design and the outcomes, again, key success criteria. So Nottingham is very fortunate in having many areas of urban wildlife and the natural environment. There is the oldest and largest area of civic allotments in Europe. And we've been able to access these areas through our work with families. So in summary, I would say that the role of Ignite as an intermediary organization that connects researchers and communities, the role has been comparable, I think, to that of a producer. The producer role that people will be familiar with in the realms of theatre or film. The role of the producer brokers and facilitates relationships from the very early stages in program design and delivery. And of course, the producer is also responsible for raising funds and to use our networks of contacts across disciplines and areas of expertise to bring different skills to each project. So one of the things that I think we are adept at is that we know other sources of funding support. We don't have to just go to the scientific research communities. We can apply to funding organizations that are interested in community arts or social and community development issues as well. So I think I shall stop and say thank you for your interest and attention. And if you have any questions, these are my contact details.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you both. Thank you so much, everyone.